Good, how you doing, Mike?
Good, fine.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Commissioner Aresco, if you'd be kind enough to open us up with a opening statement, we'll open it up to questions immediately after.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks again to everybody here at Tulane for their, as usual, wonderful hospitality. I look forward to being here, obviously. I want to congratulate and commend Mike Fitz and Troy Dannon for what they've done with the program. And obviously Willie Fritz has really got things rolling here at Tulane. And the only thing that probably has held back Tulane this year is that the conference is so good. It gets better and better. Otherwise, who knows what their record would be. They've lost just some real tough games, heartbreakers on the road. Also, you're in great shape now in basketball as well. And I, again, I want to just congratulate what Troy and Mike have built here. I always love coming to New Orleans. I've come here over the years. I've been to a lot of Final Fours and other things here over the years. So it's always a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a really terrific game today. These are two teams that can beat anybody in our league, and that's been true of a lot of teams in our league this year. I think we probably have 7 or 8, maybe even 9 teams. Maybe 10. UConn hadn't won a game the last couple of years. They've struggled, but I'm not sure anybody else can't beat everybody else. Look at what USF has done the last few weeks, giving people fits, and same thing with ECU. Mike Houston's done a fine job there. But what's impressive about Tulane, and then I'll close it off and open it to questions, is the steady progress. When Willie came, I thought it was a great hire, and Troy's one of the premier ADs in the country. He's our chair, by the way, chair of our AD group, and we're thrilled to have him. But the program has been built the right way, just steadily, one piece at a time, until now you have a level of talent and depth that you need to compete in a league like this. And as you know, I've been pretty outspoken recently about the strength of this league, and I'm not ashamed at all about it. I'm going to be continuing to do it because it's true. When you have facts on your side, it makes it a little easier. So anyway, appreciate being here. Appreciate you coming today, being here. Appreciate the attention our league gets. Thank you.
Questions for Commissioner Aresco?
Coach, on the radio on Friday, you mentioned a UCF Arizona State series. Do you have anything to add about that series?
No, it's something that they're working on, and actually it was in the portal, and I thought it was actually public, so it isn't. So I'm not going to mention that one again. But that's a series that they've been working. I want to talk about it because that was something that turned out. I thought it was public, and it wasn't. So, but they have been working on it. Yeah, they said as much. Yeah.
How crucial, Mike? How crucial is it for to get those kind of games? You always talk about getting the respect with the Power Five, and how crucial is it then for schools to schedule those kind of games?
Well, it's critical. We've got over 150 of them over the 10-year period, starting next year, and it's absolutely critical for our. Although sometimes I wonder whether we're getting through to the CFP on this. We've played these brutal schedules, and I'm not sure we're necessarily getting the credit for it. But it's really important to play the P5 schools. We call them the other P6. And our scheduling philosophy has been, if we can have each team play a couple a year, one home, one away, and then the other two, whatever, it would really help us. It would help strengthen our brand. It would help strengthen our league. It also helps strengthen our programs. You get used to playing those teams. That's what you want. Now, we have, as you know, we've been pretty close to the the P5 all year. We've been actually ahead of the ACC at times in the composite 6 computer polls. These are the polls that used to be used in the old BCS. Sager and everybody knows because they see them in USA Today. Anderson, Hester, and Colley, and others. And in those polls, we've been very close. The only way you do that is to play these P5 games, and if you win those games, then obviously the perception of your league is going to be better. And if you play them tough, you don't win them all. We play 2/3 of them on the road. One of the problems, as you know, and UCF has faced this problem, is sometimes you're asked to do 2-for-1s to be able to play certain kinds of teams. We're getting more 1-for-1s than we ever have before, but it's still a challenge for us.
You've mentioned in a couple of media interviews about the 2-year waiver for lack of divisions and round robin division play to still host the championship game. Why is that? I know it's a 2-year waiver. You've said you don't feel confident that will get extended beyond the 2 years. That maybe after 2 years you would need to be back at 12. Is that sort of the impression you're going under?
Not so much we'd need to be back at 12, but my understanding is that the waiver itself is not easily renewed. Now, we have it for 2 years, but what we may do is press for legislation to make this something permanent, which is what the Big 12 did, which is what the Sun Belt did. And the legislation has been piecemeal. It's been basically fitted to whatever the needs were of that particular conference. The the Big 12 wanted to play a 10 team, 9 game round robin and have a championship game. The Sun Belt wanted to play divisions with 10 teams. What we want to do here is something different, and that is, we want to play an 8-game conference schedule so we can play those 4 non-conference games that are really important. And to do that, you needed to get a waiver because right now the legislation says if you're fewer than 12 teams and you don't have divisions, you have to play a round robin or you have to be set up like the Sun Belt is. Well, you can't play a round robin. You can't play 10 conference games. Nobody's going to play 10 conference games. First of all, it destroys your non-conference schedule. So we had to get a waiver, which we did, and we're pleased to have that. But now what we may do, we haven't, this is a collaborative process between the conference office and our athletic directors and ultimately our presidents. What we may do is, again, press for legislation just so that after those 2 years, you can't, based on our understanding of the waiver process, you can't be really confident that you'd get a waiver extended. It's not something that typically is done. It's always possible, but it's not necessarily the way you'd want to proceed. And after 2 years, I don't know whether we'll be at 12 or whether we'll still be at 11. The one thing I've said, and the one thing that our conference feels, our athletic directors, our presidents, we don't want to expand for the sake of expansion. We don't want to be a 12 team simply for the sake of being a 12 teams. Now, having said that, we like it. We like 12. We really enjoy the divisional play. I think it gives our league an identity. It gives each division an identity. We've enjoyed the way it works. We've done a very clean schedule. You play 3 teams in the other division, and every 2 years you play those teams, and then you play the others. So you play everybody. I knew this was happening, but when I read that A&M had yet to play Georgia, and they've been in the SEC since 2012 or 13 or whatever, it's really something. When you have a 14-team league, you're still playing 8 conference games, and our teams typically do meet each other more often. So we like 12, we really do, but we're not going to do anything to diminish our brand, take a team that really doesn't belong, doesn't fit culturally or geographically or in terms of its strength of schedule and its history and its strength as a football and basketball program. Assuming we took an all-sports team, it's always possible you could take a football only. So anyway, in summing up, we have the waiver. We're happy to have that because we really needed it. We didn't want to be forced to take a 12 team, and we can play with 11. And we have a schedule now. We have we released it. We haven't actually done the actual nuts and bolts schedule, but every team knows which teams it's playing. We also are going to be working on tiebreakers. When your top 2 teams are going to play in the championship game, you've got to have a system of tiebreakers, which we have a protocol now. We're going to have to see whether that's going to work. On the other hand, matching your top 2 teams means that your championship game is likely to be, always a game that has significant meaning for the New Year's Day bid, the New Year's 6 game. Last year, Memphis wasn't in a position to play on New Year's Day had they won. And by a quirk of the whole G5 procedure, you have to be a conference champion to play in that New Year's game if you're a G5 team. You can't be simply the highest ranked CFP team. Our league has looked at that, and our league has thought about whether that should be changed. There's been no appetite to change it by the other 4 G5 conferences, but it's just a quirk. It's the way the thing was set up 7 years ago. So we have to deal with that. Now, when you have your top 2 teams, maybe you end up in a situation like we had with Memphis and UCF a couple of years ago, where whoever won that game was going to New Year's Day because they both, one was undefeated, the other had 1 loss. We could end up with a situation like that this year. It's hard to say right now. If we have 2 one-loss teams in our championship game, it's and we may not, especially if it comes down to Cincinnati and Memphis, because they're going to play each other at the end of the season. So one of them's going to going to have 2 losses. But if you did have, 2 one-loss teams, let's assume that could, and I guess it could happen technically with SMU versus a Cincinnati or something like that. You'd pretty much have a lock on New Year's Day. One of the points I've made, and I was just, maybe you were going to ask me about this anyway, but I think a 2-loss team from our conference should be on New Year's Day. I feel really strongly about that. But anyway, that may be something for another question.
Mike, here in the back, it's become a trend, especially the last few years, where when you get to the postseason, players that are going to the NFL draft will sit out, and so collectively the team's not the same. Because of that, do you feel like winning in the non-conference against Power 5 teams is even valued higher than the postseason at this point?
I think it should be. I think that the regular season is more important in many ways. Look, we don't diminish the postseason at all. We enjoy playing in the bowl games, but my feeling has been that those regular season non-conference games are what define you, unless it's a New Year's Day game or a higher profile P5 game in the bowls. Really that makes my point. We are much more like those other 5 than we are like the G4. And we have the same problems. We have so many good NFL, type players, so many players who are going to obviously play in the NFL that we've seen more and more of them sit out. Last year, Darrell Henderson, we had Raquel Armstead at Temple didn't play. Rock Ya-Sin didn't play. He's our best defensive player. We had others who didn't play, and you're seeing that more and more. The quality of this league is such that you'll probably see it more. I lament it. I wish people would play. I fully understand it, though. I understand the motivation of the players, but it's been a problem for us. So I think that the better gauge of your strength is are you winning and being competitive in those big non-conference games during the regular season. And we've won between the regular season and the New Year's Day bowl games where you really can make an impact, and typically your players play in that game. Now not everybody does. We had some players last year at LSU who didn't play in the game, but when you win those games, we've had 5 top 10 wins. No G5 team has ever had a top 10 win. We've had 5, and we've come close to a few others where we beat teams on the fringe of the top 10. So when you can do that in New Year's Day games, the other games, I don't want to act as though we don't care about those games. We do. We want to win the bowl games. We want to have good bowl records. But it is a problem for us when when some of your best players aren't playing. It definitely. Look at West Virginia last year. Their quarterback did not play, and when your top quarterback doesn't play in the game, it's going to have a huge impact on what you're able to do in a bowl game. And so, how indicative is that of your strength or your quality as a team?
Couple of questions.
Yeah.
First of all, with the next 2 years in this format, will you be conscious in trying to put together a schedule that maybe stays away from at least projected bigger matchups at the end of the year to avoid the possibility of a rematch in the championship, say 1 week later? And then for this bowl season, with so many of the P5 conferences looking like they're going to come up short in terms of filling bowl slots, do you expect to see some horse trading going on to where your conference and maybe some others can get into some of those spots and get an opportunity to play some more P5 teams in bowl games than maybe you would have gotten otherwise?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the other one, I think our schedule is really going to be it's going to try to be fair and I don't want to sound like Fox News, fair and balanced. But the point is, that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to make it balanced and fair. We don't typically backload the schedule like you do in basketball. At CBS, I programmed basketball and football at CBS, college football, for a number of years, and basketball schedules tended to get backloaded, for TV. We certainly are cognizant of our TV partner, and we work with them to put together a heck of a balanced schedule throughout the year. But I don't think you're going to see that issue. I think it's going to be based on where your buy dates are, how the computers tell you the schedule should shake out in terms of balance. You don't want teams playing 4 straight road games or 4 straight home games, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of considerations that go into that. In terms of your other question was, I'm sorry,
the bowls this year and possible horse trading. Better spots.
We think we've got a shot at some bowls. For example, we might have a shot at the Liberty Bowl where we would play, if the SEC doesn't qualify enough teams, we might have a shot at the Liberty Bowl. When you look at schedules, teams have a couple of more games. Some have 5 wins, and you say, okay, will they win one of the next 2? Will they lose them both? We did get in the Liberty Bowl a few years ago, and we were able to play a Big 12 team. It's not out of the question. We actually work with ESPN. They televise most of the bowl games, as you know, and we're in several that they own. And they have the ability sometimes to move teams around to get us some pretty good matchups. It's possible that one of our teams could end up playing BYU. I know BYU is not technically a P5 team, although a lot of conferences have designated them a P5 team for purposes of scheduling. But I think there's a chance we could end up in a few other games. The Independence Bowl could have an opening. I don't know, though, whether they'll have a P5 team. In the new bowl cycle starting next year, we've upgraded to the extent that we'll have the Military Bowl and play the ACC. We'll have the Fenway Park Bowl, play the ACC. So we know we're going to have 2 that we think they'll qualify pretty much every year based on the selection priority. And then we hope to play an SEC team in Birmingham, on a regular basis. You never know. We have a shot to play a Big 12 team in one of the Texas games. In the future, we're going to have an opportunity to play in any number of ESPN games. They're going to have the flexibility to put us in any number of games. Right now, we're pretty well set for our lineup, and ESPN would have to do some horse trading, and I don't know how many openings are going to be yet.
Mike, would you update us on the? You want to go first?
Yeah, maybe just with UConn leaving, they had to do some adjustments with the schedules in the next 2 years. And Tulane Bancorp is playing at UCF 2 straight years and at East Carolina 2 straight years. It's really the only team that got in that situation. Do you have any insight as to how it worked out that way?
Well, what they wanted to do is have have the teams play the teams they've been playing in their division, in addition to teams obviously from the other division, and they wanted to have everybody play everybody at least once over the 2-year period. That was the major goal. And then the question was, okay, in terms of the opponents, once you do that, you basically have your set of opponents. Now the question is going to be how you set up your schedule, where the bye dates fall. This year's been unusual because you've got the 14-week schedule where you had 2 byes, and you're not going to necessarily have that. This is going to be a little tougher on Thursday and Friday games for ESPN. That's another thing, we have to schedule those. But the first stage was really figuring out who each team was going to play. And sometimes, whether you're on the road or home, it had to do with really just making sure we had everybody playing everybody else the first couple of years. That was a real goal. We didn't want to have teams missing, especially people. We didn't want to have teams missing people that were in their division that had become their rivals and had become obviously important to play.
Would you update us on the future of the network television contracts with the conferences and with college football, because that could play a role in possible conference shakeups, and if that was to happen, how might that affect this conference?
I'm not a prophet. I don't really know how it's going to go. Several of the P5 conferences have deals coming up in the next few years. Big Ten coming up in a few years. Pac-12, Big 12, I think, are 2024. 25. I wouldn't even begin to speculate, what might happen there. But I think the college landscape appears stable to me. Now, the minute you say that, something could happen, but it seems relatively stable for a lot of reasons. We went through that whole Big 12 thing a few years ago, and based on their extension with ESPN or whatever they did with ESPN, it doesn't look like much is likely to happen. But you never know. But it's interesting. We went out a little bit further, but we also got a deal that really helps us. It helps us, maintain what we're doing and build on what we're doing. Gives everyone more revenue that they needed, and down the road, you have an opportunity to talk to your partner about things, and we'll have to see how the things shake out over the next 4 or 5 years when those new deals come down, and then I think you will see the college football playoff negotiated probably around that time as well. The last year of that is 25. You may see something sooner. More teams get left out. Maybe there'll be a groundswell building for an expansion of that playoff. Who knows? We haven't talked much about it.
You guys lobbying, all the other conference commissioners, G5 conference commissioners lobbying a little bit maybe for that expansion of the playoff system, and then maybe possibly have some conference champions included in that?
I've been a proponent of it. In the CFP meetings, we've talked about it, and I think if there is expansion of the playoff, I don't know how it's going to go, but I suspect that you might have guaranteed slots for conference champions. You might. I don't know. I'm not sure that that's the way you would go. But if you did, do I think a G5 champion would have a guaranteed slot? I do. I think they would. I think the pressure and the credibility of the thing, the public pressure would be such that you would do that. Because again, UCF being undefeated 2 straight years and not having a shot to play for it, when you have some outstanding one-loss teams in our conference and some of the other G5 conferences that don't have a chance to play for it, that's what I think will cause that to happen. I think. You don't know. That's if they go that route. Now, you could also, there are plenty of ways you can do it. You can do it with just, again, the top committee picks the top 8 teams, or, you take the top 8 teams. I don't know how it's going to go if that discuss. And by the way, there's no guarantee that it'll happen either. There are plenty of issues still with expanding the playoff, whether it's the health and well-being of players, because you have to play that extra game. Not everybody has to play that extra game, but some teams do. You get to the point where we're almost at an NFL level schedule. The calendar is an issue. And where are you going to play the early games? Are you going to play them at home sites? Are you going to play them somewhere else? There are plenty of things that would have to be worked out if this were ever to happen. So it's no guarantee, but if it does happen, I have a feeling that there'll be access for one of our teams. Now, given my druthers, if there were guaranteed access for the P5, I'd want it for us, and then let's have another slot for the G5, because I've made it very clear that regardless of what happens with the playoff, we would like to get a contract bowl game down the road. And what I mean by that is we can be a rotating team like the old Big East was. We are the successor conference to the old Big East football. I think we're probably even stronger than that conference was. We're deeper, we're stronger. There was only an 8-team conference. But we want a guaranteed slot on New Year's Day. And you could easily take the Peach Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and the Cotton Bowl, and there are 6 slots. One right now goes to the G5. Okay, leave that for the G4. They should actually want that, because I think we've been the biggest roadblock to the other conferences getting in. We've dominated that 4 out of the 6 years, although one of the years was the last year of the BCS. So if you do that, you give us one of the other slots. And we're rotating. We don't remember the old Big East was in the BCS, but it did not have a home bowl game. It did not have a contract bowl, or they were contract bowls. They weren't called that in those days. They did not have a game they were assigned to every year. Okay, so we could easily do something like that. Now, it's always a fight, of course. It's going to be a battle, but I think the more credibility we earn, the better we get. It's going to be a little harder to tell us that shouldn't happen.
I thought your outspokenness was refreshing. Would it make a difference if more of the other conference commissioners were just as outspoken, or would it play no role at all?
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm glad that, I think the response, by the way, was really positive, because I have facts on our side. I felt, here's the reason I did that, and I did it a few years ago with UCF. UCF really was not treated properly a few years ago. Even after they beat Auburn, they were still defending the fact that they were number 12, and what more did you need just after you watch that game? But this has happened to us historically. I don't know how many people remember 2015, we had 4 teams in the top 25. We had a powerful conference. We had 3 teams undefeated deep into the season. Memphis beat Ole Miss after they had just beaten Alabama, one of the seminal victories in our conference history. Temple almost beat Notre Dame on a primetime game on ABC, came within a hair of beating them, led with 2 minutes left. Almost shocked the world, because no one thought they'd compete, and I knew they would. In addition, they beat Penn State that year by 17 points. Penn State, I think, took Ohio State to double overtime that year, and they beat them by 17 points. We had some really outside. Houston was an outstanding team. They were 10-0 at one point, and they were ranked 18th in the CFP. And I want the committee to start comparing outcomes too, because that year, Houston beat Vanderbilt 34-0, just absolutely destroyed them. Vanderbilt almost beat Florida in the Swamp. They lost on a last-second field goal, 9-7. That tells you, I think, all you need to know. and Florida was one of the better SEC teams that year. Vanderbilt was winning games in the SEC, and Houston won a game at Louisville on the road that year. And you saw what they did to Florida State in the bowl game. And yet, look where they were ranked. They never really rose that high until the very, very end, and that wasn't a CFP ranking, that was the polls. The CFP doesn't rank you after the bowl games. So this year, I felt that we'd reached a tipping point because I'm tired of this continuing to happen, and I felt that maybe I could persuade. I don't attack the committee personally. I don't attack people's credibility. I would never do that. That's not the issue. What I was attacking is, okay, what's the methodology? And how do you reach these conclusions? And I think I had facts on my side. I mean, when the eye-popping number, I did a lot of radio this week, and I did, a lot of print media as well. Did some online stuff. Did the interview with Heather Dinich, and Heather's very influential, and she wrote on, ESPN. I basically said, look, this conference has a 27-1 record against non-Power 5 schools. That's 14-1 against the G5 and 13-0 against the others. And the others include Army, which Tulane did a pretty nice job up there, played really well. Includes BYU. USF beat BYU. BYU beat Boise. BYU just beat Utah State 42-14. BYU beat Utah State 42-14. USF, which is a good team, but they're not one of our top teams, beat them. There are a lot of situations like that. I said Cincinnati went to Marshall and was leading 45-0 and won 55-14, and Marshall lost to Boise on the blue turf 14-7. I said, do people look at those kinds of comparable scores? Why is an SMU below an Appalachian State when Appalachian State loses to Georgia Southern at home, and the only loss SMU has is to an 18th ranked Memphis, which could even be ranked higher, on the road in a primetime game on ABC, and they've beaten TCU on the road. They beat a good Arkansas State team on the road, tough place to play. They've done well in our conference. They're 9-1. If our conference is that much stronger, and our conference, by the way, in the composite of the computer polls has been ahead of the ACC and the Pac-12 part of the year. They're a little behind right now, but they're right there. They're much closer to 4 of the P5 conferences than they are to the Mountain West or the Sun Belt. I think we were almost 15 points ahead of the Mountain West and almost 23 points ahead of the Sun Belt. And those polls are very well respected. In addition, the very metric that the committee uses, and we were able to point this out to our committee reps, at least we're able to talk to some committee reps from time to time. The metric the committee uses, is basically sports source metrics, which does a strength of schedule. And our strength of schedules were far better than the other 3 teams that were in the mix at that time, which is Boise, Appalachian State, San Diego State. It wasn't even close. Cincinnati was 41. Our highest was 72. Our lower number's better. And theirs were, Boise was in the 90s. I think Appalachian State was 102 and San Diego State was 124, something like that. You can double check that. I think those are accurate numbers. And that tells you, I think, what you need to know. I think I needed to point that out. I think it was really important because otherwise, if we don't build media and public support, then I don't know how else you influence, the committee. The influence would be, you say the committee may look at it differently.
Well, that's what I was saying. You've done a good job at it. The question is, will you get help from other commissioners to do the same?
I haven't heard anybody else speak up, so I don't know. But I guess then again, what I'm doing too is I'm talking about how our conference is better than theirs, so they're not likely to necessarily speak up. I'm probably not. It's funny. I've got good friendships and relationships there, and the feedback from some people from those other conferences and some ADs I've talked to said that's what you should be doing. They didn't resent it at all. There was no hostility at all. They said that's what you're supposed to do. We should be doing that too. If you have the facts on your side, that's the key. It's hard to argue the 27-1 record. It's a fact. Okay, it's hard to argue some of the other strength of schedule metrics and all, and some of the comparable outcomes that I talked about, and there are plenty of those. So I just think if you're the strongest, and here's the other thing, the double standard is what I really wanted to point out. I want the committee to sit back and say, gee, do we inadvertently apply a double standard? I'm not accusing them of intentionally applying a double standard, but if in fact, and this is where I got a lot of support, and no one really argued this point, because I don't know how you argue it. Historically, since the CFP's been founded, if we are behind, if our one loss and undefeated teams, which have been really good teams, and they've proven it on New Year's Day, even last year, I think with Mackenzie Milton, UCF wins that game. That's my own feeling, and they almost won it anyway. If you look at the history of this, we have been behind in the CFP rankings any number of 2, 3, 4 lost teams. And the reason our one-loss team and our undefeated teams, I mentioned Houston, undefeated, 10-0 at 18 after what they did to Vanderbilt and what they did in our league, which, by the way, our league was the strongest it's ever been that year. I just mentioned all the great wins we had that year. If that's the case, then what you're basically saying is you're putting all these 2 and 3 and 4 loss teams ahead of us. I mean, you had a 4-loss USC ahead of SMU. And you also get into this business, I think Tom Fornelli called it respectable loss syndrome. He said, you got to get out of this respectable loss syndrome. And how many respectable losses can you have before you're not ranked anymore? The point is, though, if that's happening, okay, that's a given, because we can prove it. You can see it every year, and it's happening again this year. A number of 2 and 3 loss teams are ahead of our 1-loss teams. They say it's the strength of your schedules. They don't say strength of conference per se, but implicit in that is strength of conference, of course, because look at the non-conference games we play. And by the way, we only played at Ohio State. We played at Oklahoma. Tulane played a really tough game at Auburn. Gave them a good battle. It was a close game, well into that third quarter, fourth quarter. Had a chance, dropped pass in the end zone, had a chance to make that a game. We played at Michigan State. We played Oklahoma State. We played at Oklahoma. We played Wisconsin. We played at Notre Dame. We played, all these kinds of games, and I can name several others. So it's really our conference that they're looking at when they say strength of schedule, strength of conference. Okay, so given that, now that the shoe, and I've never agreed with that necessarily because I thought we were stronger than they gave us credit for, but now that the shoe's on the other foot, and we are that much stronger in terms of strength of schedule than our G5 brethren, we're that much stronger in terms of all these other metrics, yet our one-loss teams are still ranked below some one-loss teams from those other conferences. We're not even talking about a 2-loss team. A 2-loss, that's why I made the point, I wanted to get ahead of this and say a 2-loss team should be ahead of one of those teams, or any other G5 team, a 2-loss team, let alone a 1-loss team. But we find SMU behind Appalachian State. We find SMU behind Boise. We find Boise right there with Cincinnati and Memphis, who have to play each other. And so my concern is, if we're that much stronger, and we have that 27-1 record, 14-1 record against the G5, 3-0 against the Mountain West, 4-0 against the Sun Belt, if we have all these other metrics, the strength of schedule, we have the computer rankings, the 6 of them that are well respected, why aren't we getting the benefit of the doubt that you give to the P5 over us when they have 2 losses, 3 losses, 4 losses? And I think it's a legitimate question. And the other thing is, it cuts both ways, because I think in part we should be ranked higher vis-a-vis the P5. But when it comes to the G5, we're not getting the benefit of that doubt. So my point is, are you looking at those rankings the same as obviously you have to spend a lot of time on the top 4, the top 10, the top 8, whatever. But this is pretty important to us. That G5 game is a really, really important game to building our brand, building our conference. And so I just felt it was worth pointing out, because maybe they'll think about it. Maybe they'll understand why we're frustrated. Maybe it'll do some good. I don't know if it will or not. But I thought it was time to talk about it. And you can talk about it respectfully as long as you stick to the facts. You don't attack people personally. As long as you do that, then I don't see any reason why you can't do it. Now, the response has been phenomenal. We have gotten in Twitter, people going on Twitter. I saw one with Tim Brando. I saw others. I've gotten a lot of texts and messages myself. Social media, supposedly, as far as I know, our PR people tell us that it's been very supportive. They said he's making good points. This is correct. This conference has been undervalued and disrespected for a number of years. And at some point, you got to point it out, because I can tell you this: I guarantee you, if I wasn't pointing this out, I don't think much would happen, because nothing's happened the last several years. The same, and this year, I think this was a tipping point year, because our conference is deeper and stronger than it's ever been. It was pretty strong in 2015. I'm not going to argue that conference didn't have some great teams. Maybe the bottom wasn't as strong. You know, obviously UConn has struggled, but every other team in our conference, ECU struggled at times, but everybody in our conference can give everybody a really tough game. Houston gives everybody a tough game. They haven't tanked. They're playing hard. They've got real talent. And in some of these other leagues, Houston might be right there competing for the title. So anyway, those are the points I felt I had to make.
Anything else?
Very good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Commissioner, as always.